Hello, everybody, and welcome to brand new 2020 Chat Show, a show for small business owners and creative entrepreneurs to help you build your brand, boost your business, and grow your audience. So I'm Olivia, and for those of you who've been watching the show from the start, just to let you know, I'm now going to be hosting the Chat Show by myself, as my lovely co-host Tam is now going to be the host of the brand new 2020 Creative Hub, which is all going to be about education, networking, and community over on our Facebook group. So good luck with that, Tam. I'll see you on Facebook, and thanks for having been such a great co-host this last 2 months. I shall miss you. But the show must go on. So today it's my pleasure to introduce my next guest. So he's an entrepreneur, he's a speaker, he's an author, he's a coder, and he's a culture builder. And so please welcome Benjamin Drury, aka the Culture Guy. And we're going to be talking about how to be the guardian of our own culture. Hi, Ben. Welcome to the show. It's great to have you here.
Hi, Olivia. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's fantastic. So, Ben, before any show, I like to do a little bit of research on my guests. And I have to admit, I was a little bit impressed by your bio on your website, because there's a lot more to you than just a few titles I've just mentioned. You've trained as a social worker. You've written and directed stage productions. You've developed training courses. You design internet banks. You build web application, and the list goes on and on. So there's clearly no stopping you. But what we really want to know today is, who is the Culture Guy and what exactly does he do?
Yeah, that's quite a list. I don't know whether that says I'm enigmatic or I just can't finish things. So I guess you will have to leave that up to the listeners. I've had a bit of a long journey through kind of working in IT development, into working in the theatre, touring with theatre companies. I'm a trained social worker. I've run my own tech company. I've worked in retail organisations. I've worked in education. So I've been around the block.
Yes.
And I think all that has led to a real interesting picture on culture, and an interesting picture on how organisations are run and how different industries run their organisations. And it really got me kind of obsessed, really, about how to build places where people thrive. Some of the organizations I've worked with were brilliant at it, and they seem to make it look easy. Other organizations really, really struggled to build places that weren't built around policies and procedures, and it wasn't a very free-flowing culture. But from my experience, it's when you build culture, it has a massive impact on the success of your organization. Strong cultures actually improve your organization, and the bottom line of your organization. So it always struck me as really, really strange as to why every organization didn't do it.
Yeah.
And so I got a little bit obsessed about why and how, and I spend my time now just helping organizations try and create places where their people can thrive and they can actually start to achieve their goals quicker.
Yeah. That's fantastic. I really like the title of our show today, be the guardian of your own culture. So this is a title that got inspired by some of the wordings on your website, and it kind of just reminding me of, the Guardians of the Galaxy. I'm a bit of a superhero movie fan myself. It really kind of rang true, because I think as business owners, we kind of want to be the superhero of our own business. We want to make sure that the business grows. But we also want to make sure that we can protect its values. So before we fly off like Superman, can you just go back and explain to us exactly what is culture? How should we be thinking about culture for our business?
That's a really great question. I love the analogy as well, because the music in that film, I'm an 80s kid, so the music in that film is just, I absolutely love it. So love the analogy, it's good. But yeah, it really is one of those problems that I see a lot of my clients have, is that actually, how do you make sure everybody becomes the guardian of the culture? How do you make sure it's not just you? And the biggest pain point I see the people I work with have is they are trying to be the guardian of their culture, but they haven't built the structure so that when they step away, that culture carries on. So everybody becomes the guardian of the culture. Yeah. And culture is nothing more than a set of shared values and behaviors. When two or more people come together, you know, whether it's kids in a playground or a family come together, you end up with a shared set of values and a shared set of behaviors. In my house, we have a shared set of values, and we haven't sat down and discussed them and organized them and said, these are the values. They've just kind of coalesced to something we're all happy with that works for us. Mm-hmm. And the same thing happens in an organization, whether you define it or not. You end up with this shared set of values and shared set of behaviors, and that's all your culture is. It comes from the Latin word to grow.
Yeah.
And what grows depends on those values. Weeds can grow or beautiful plants can grow depending on the culture you put them in. And so that's all culture is. It's just that shared set of values and that shared set of behaviors when two people come together.
Yeah. So why is that important for any business to have that, to have a real defined culture part of their organization?
And that is really the crux of the issue, that you have a culture whether you like it or not. When two people come together, that shared set of values will happen, whether you like it or not. And the thing about culture is it affects absolutely everything in your organization, from the revenue, to the dress code, to how you hire, to the way you talk to each other, to the way your customers perceive you. It has a big impact on your brand and how people view you. And if it's got such a big impact, why are you leaving it to organically develop? Why aren't you sitting down and going, no, this is what we're trying to build. This is who we are. What do we need to do to make that happen? And it is so important that in my opinion, it's more important than strategy in terms of defining that culture and creating it. And the number one priority of any leader in an organization should be first, the culture.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's clearly that we live in some society today where we all want to be part of something bigger as well. We want to be part of a team. So I guess, the first step would be for any organization to really sort of sit down, and we do need to kind of structure a culture for big business. It can happen organically and naturally, but when you have multiple, employees, how do we go about how do we start the process of defining your culture?
Yeah, I think you said it right at the beginning of that. We all want to put our shoulder to something that's worthwhile. And none of us really want to be doing just mundane work, and we have to as part of our job, but we want to know it's contributing to something bigger. Yeah. And so the first part of building your culture is understanding why you exist. What is it that you're bringing to the world? What is the organization there for? If it didn't exist, would the world be a worse place? And actually, if you're building the right sort of organization, the answer is always yes. The world wouldn't be quite as good if we didn't exist, if we weren't delivering what we're delivering, if we weren't solving the problem we were solving. So actually, the first part of building your culture is defining what you stand for. What is it you do and why? Why are you important? And then from there, you can start to look at, well, what are the behaviors you need? And then you need to implement those behaviors in your organization, make people able to replicate them across the whole organization.
Yeah. And then there's an interesting stats that I picked up from Culture IQ, which found that employees' overall ratings of their company's qualities, and that's including collaboration, environment, and values, are rated 20% higher at companies that exhibit a strong culture. So with that in mind, should a company be should they be including their employees in the process? Should they be speaking to their employees to find out how the company is perceived from the inside?
Absolutely, but not necessarily in the way you think. The culture should be led from the top. The leadership define the culture. They cast this shadow over the organization in the way they behave and the values they hold. And it doesn't mean that the employees shouldn't be involved in crafting that. They absolutely should. But the key role of the employees, bringing us back to the title, is of guardians of that culture. One of the things I do whenever I work with people is I'll sit down with the leadership and I'll go through defining what the culture is. And then I'll go through the exact same process blind with various pockets within the organization, because what that does is tell me whether the leadership are lying to me. Are they telling me this beautiful rose-tinted picture, or are they actually giving me the truth? Yeah. And what you can then do is go, well, actually, this is what you say, and this is what the rest of the organization say. Here are the holes and the gaps. This is what you're telling me, but it doesn't match up quite. So where do we need to put our energy and put our work to fix the culture? So it's more about, like you said, they are the police. You know, your employees are the people that will be able to tell you whether it's real, whether it's true, whether what you're saying your culture is and what you've defined as your culture, you're actually living out. They will be the arbiters, not you as a leader. You can define it as a leader and say, this is who we want to be, but your employees are the people that are going to tell you whether you actually are or not, and they're going to hold a mirror up to you.
Okay, that's interesting. And are there any common mistakes that companies make when they start to define their culture? And how can we avoid making those mistakes?
Yeah, there are often mistakes, and it's not necessarily mistakes of when we start defining the culture. It's more mistakes of before you realize you need to do it well. These are the kind of mistakes you might make. And one of the key ones is copying. You mentioned in when we had a conversation previously about, you know, table tennis tables and bean bags and all those great things. Actually, what you'll find is that organizations that haven't fully defined their culture or haven't done it properly will copy some of the symptoms of other people's culture. So they go, right, we'll get a table tennis table, or we might have unlimited holidays because they're doing it over there. And that is essentially trying to copy somebody else's culture, but all you're doing is you're taking the symptoms of their culture and trying to apply it to you.
Yeah.
And you don't share the same values. You don't have the same underlying core beliefs. And therefore it just looks silly, or it doesn't work, or it doesn't have the impact you want it to have, because all you're doing is taking the symptoms. Whereas the company over here that you're copying from, they have said, these are our absolute core values, and this is who we are as an organization. Therefore, the outworking of that might be having table tennis tables, or might be having unlimited holidays, or might be having more flexible working, or might be having weekly barbecues with the staff where we just lark about, because that is who they are.
Yeah.
You're not them. And therefore, if you try and do it, it just looks inauthentic. It just looks silly. It doesn't reflect the reality. It just looks like, you know, putting a Band-Aid on a broken leg. It doesn't work. And so that one of the key things is you can't copy somebody else's culture. And this is, I find this really, really refreshing, because people can steal your IP and they can steal what you're trying to deliver, and they can steal your product. And, you know, you need a lot of money to defend it in court if you want to, but they can't steal your culture. So if you define your culture really clearly, it doesn't matter what they take of you. They can never be you. They can never deliver to your standards, to the way you deliver. And copying other people's culture is a massive thing. And we see it all the time. And that's when you start to, you interact with organizations and you see they're really, really inauthentic. And we notice it as customers, even if we can't understand what we're noticing. So it's really key that, you know, don't try and copy somebody else's culture. Define your own. And then, you know, the behaviors that come out of that will be different, and they'll be uniquely you, which is great. And I think one of the other key ones is people hire for skill. You know, if you've got two people, one is more skilled than the other, they'll hire the most skilled person because their CV looks good and they can deliver the work that you want to deliver. But if they don't fit the culture, they're going to have a much more detrimental effect on your organization, regardless of how skilled they are. And so you've got to remember to hire for culture. And that doesn't mean I say, you know, hire someone that's not skilled but fits the culture over someone that's massively skilled and doesn't fit the culture. You know, find someone that is skilled. They might not be as highly skilled as the next person, but if they fit the culture, you can train them. They can grow that little bit in their skill. But it's much more difficult to try and change someone's value base. Yeah.
I mean, being my own business for the last 15 years, I haven't had to have a formal interview for a corporate, and, you know, that was years ago. So I'm a little bit out of sync on that one. But I do hear now more and more through contacts, through people that I know that do still work maybe in the corporate world and are going through interviews for new jobs, how now the interview is pretty much half based on who they are as a person, what they like to do as hobbies, exactly like what you've just said, to try and figure out whether these people fit in the culture of the company and not just by what their CV says. So yeah, I see that a lot around me.
It's good. It is getting much better, as you say. Companies are starting to twig that actually, you know, you can hire someone for skill, but if they're a bad apple, they're going to infect the whole barrel, as the paraphrase goes. So you do have to make sure they fit into the organization. And one of the things I encourage anybody I work with is we have what we call a power of veto, so that whoever you're interviewing has to spend time with everybody in the department they're working with. And if you're a small business, everybody in the organization. Yeah. And anybody can put their hand up and go, I don't think you should hire this person, without having to explain why. Because often we have this kind of under the surface feeling about someone that we can't quite put our finger on, that our subconscious is picking up on cues that we can't explain. And if you force people to explain, then actually you miss that wealth of kind of experience of human interaction. And people, when you implement that policy, people use it so rarely, it actually becomes a really, really good tool for you to be able to go, well, hold on a minute, there's something about this person doesn't quite fit and I don't know what it is. Let's avoid them.
Yeah. I mean, you'd have to trust that your employees are doing it for the right reasons as well. And that it's all about intuition and not for any other,
absolutely. But if you've got
jealousy or anything else.
Absolutely. But if you've hired right up to now, your employees share your values and fit. So they're only going to use it to, they want to grow the business. They want to work with people that are brilliant. So they are only going to use it sparingly when there is something they can't quite put their finger on, but
and in a positive way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. So like you said, we understand that we now need to build some kind of positive culture within our business, and it goes beyond ping pong tables and free Friday beers. So once we've outlined what the culture is we want for our business, how do we then prepare to actually act on it?
Great question. And this is the real crux of where most businesses fall down. A lot of businesses go on retreats and they articulate wonderful values and laudable aims, and then they come home and they don't live them out. They don't deliver on them. They stick them on the wall, but nobody in the organization believes they're true. The key to the thing is actually, how do you integrate those behaviors so that the values you've said and the behaviors that mirror those values run through your organization like a stick of rock? And we take organizations through a 4-step process, essentially. One is to define it, to actually figure out what those values are. But the other 3 stages are all about implementation. And the first part is team. Make sure you have the right people who can deliver. If you've got people who fundamentally do not agree with the values you've set, then they don't belong in your organization, because they're just not going to be able to deliver on those values day in, day out. The second part is then voice. All your communication, the way you talk to each other internally, your marketing externally, all that kind of thing, and the way you answer the phone, all those communication-based things have to mirror the values. They have to reflect and reinforce the values. So you've got to look at all your communication and say, well, actually, the way we do this, does that really reflect who we are? Or is it reflecting a completely different value? And then finally, what we call focus, where actually all your policies and your procedures and the way you do things all have to mirror that set of values that you've set out, the way you've chosen to do things. So, if you've got a policy of flexible working, you need to give people laptops and not desktops. Just simple things like that. If you want people to collaborate, stop rewarding high performers because they're not going to collaborate. So anything that the way you operate in your organization that cuts across those values and the behaviors that you've defined as reflecting those values, you have to look at and you have to change. And that is the hard part. Actually changing the way you communicate and changing the way you operate is actually quite tough.
Yeah.
But that is how you're going to implement your values.
Okay. And so a quick question like this is, once you've done that, can your values change over time? Your company grows, you 10 years down the line, your culture, your values might have evolved or moved on. How easy is it to then change it internally?
Often they don't change that much very quickly. The core values, the way you work might do. The industries you work in might change.
Yeah.
The way you go about business may have a massive shift due to technology, but the underlying core values probably won't change that much. And if they do, it'll be slow iteration rather than wholesale change. If you have a set of values and then 3 years down the line, you're over here,
Mm.
People are just going to stop listening because they're going to go, well, in 3 years, it's going to be different. Why am I even going to bother?
Mm.
But what you'll find is if you really dig down to your core values, and this goes back again to the question of what mistakes people make.
Mm.
Often when defining values, people don't dig deep enough.
Yeah.
You know, they talk about integrity and honesty and openness. And actually, those are often symptoms and reflections of underlying core values, possibly of something like compassion. You know, we genuinely have compassion for our clients and care about solving their problems.
Mm.
Therefore, we're honest and we have integrity because we don't want to deliver something that's not going to solve their problems because we genuinely care about them.
Yeah.
So actually, if you dig deep enough and you get to those true core values, they don't change that often, even though you know the way you do things may change. And Jim Collins talks about this in his book Good to Great. What he talks about is preserving the core, and having space to change. And it is that core that never changes. This is what we stand on. This is foundational to us. Actually, if we had to cut across one of these values, we'd rather go out of business because it's so fundamental to who we are. So they don't change often or very quickly.
Yeah, no, I get that. So do you have any examples on top of your head of companies out there that you think have a successful culture, or maybe some that don't? Do you have any examples to share with us?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is where it gets a little bit controversial because successful cultures are not necessarily what we would call good cultures. You know, people talk about good cultures and bad cultures, and I always kind of say, nope, it's not about good or bad. It's about weak versus strong. Okay. It's about cultures that are really strong and clear and consistent that are the ones that breed success. And they may not necessarily be cultures that we would consider good. Amazon, for example. I look at Amazon and go, oh, I don't like it because people aren't really looked after that well. But as a culture, it is massively strong. Everybody knows what's expected of them. It's really clear. It doesn't change. And so there is a massive consistency. And that is what has driven their success because they are really clear and consistent and true. Even though I would look at the culture and go, that's a bit nasty.
Yeah.
And Uber is another example. Uber's culture of highly competitive. You know, they broke the law and they were massively unethical in various places, as I would consider. But their culture of competition, win at all costs, this is our fundamental value, took what they built to $1 billion valuation. Was it a success? Yes, as far as the people that were building it were concerned.
Yeah. Was
it a cultural, social, ethical success? Absolutely not. But the markets don't care about ethical and social. They care about financial. So there is this kind of dichotomy of good versus bad versus weak versus strong. And it's the strong cultures that are successful, I'm sad to say, because I would rather the good cultures were successful. But I mean, there are other cultures like, you know, the British company, the British HR application company called Forth. They are consistently at the top of the British cultural rankings because they have a consistent culture that looks after their people and creates a place where they can thrive. And so they are always at the top. You know, companies like Patagonia, the clothing manufacturer, you know, they consistently have this value of being ecologically sound and having no negative impact in their supply chain. And it is constant and consistent and authentic. That's why people love the company. That's why people choose to buy. They may be slightly more expensive, but that is because they are looking after everybody in their supply chain really, really well. Things like that. Netflix is always brought up. And even, you know, small companies. A lot of your guests, you had James and Kelly on a couple of weeks ago from the Only Networking. You know, the work that they've done on their culture sets them apart from other networking organizations because they are really clear on what their values are and they live them out. And you can see every interaction you have with James and Kelly just oozes the values that they've set. So they're massively authentic and they're growing so quickly because people believe in what they're building. Yeah.
And that kind of like leads nicely to my next question, which was about how we tend to maybe associate culture with bigger structure, with, you know, lots of employees. But can culture be also benefit for smaller businesses? Whether you're just a one man or woman band, do we need a culture even as a small business?
Absolutely, you do. You've got a culture, whether you like it or not. And I think there are two sides to that. One, if you are going to grow as a business, the sooner you do it, the better. Because often clients will come to me when they've got 18 people and £1 million turnover, and they are struggling because they're having to work so hard because they haven't put the cultural structure in place. So if you're looking to grow, absolutely. But also, if you are looking to stay small and be 1 or 2 person organization, really truly understanding your value base, really truly understanding what you do and why you do it, and the lines you will not cross and the behaviors you want, make it much easier to make decisions and cycle through problems and connect with your ideal client. It just really allows you to focus your messaging because you truly understand what it is you're building. And you might know that yourself, but unless you focus it on paper, you tend to remake those decisions every time you put a message out or every time you interact with a client. Whereas actually, when it's focused on paper, it just makes it much easier to make those decisions and deliver that messaging because you are so razor sharp clear.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely. I mean, and then some of the people that even Tam's been through one of the workshops I've done, found it massively helpful in clarifying who she is as a designer and as a brand creator, so that she really helped her focus who she was talking to and how she spoke to her clients.
Yeah. And it's a really exciting, journey to go through. I mean, as a photographer, I mean, when I started 20 years ago working in corporate, I worked for a few years for IBM. So that there was a culture within IBM. It wasn't the culture I wanted to be part of. Then I worked for a couple of years for a smaller business in the gaming industry. So I wasn't very keen on the whole gaming industry, but the culture of that company was really fun and really enjoyable to be part of. Then I kind of went on as a photographer, and I guess the word culture kind of went out the window. I kind of forgot about it. But now with Brand New 2020, the word is definitely coming back on the forefront. And I think what Tam and I are going through at the moment is trying to define our own values of what Brand New 20 is going to be and what it's going to represent. So it's a very exciting journey to go through. And how closely is working at your culture and your marketing, how closely should they be joined to the hip, or are they sort of 2 different journeys that you need to take when you set up your business? Or
Absolutely. They both grow from the same stem, essentially. So when you define your culture, the first thing you do is define what you stand for and who you are. And your brand messaging and your marketing messaging should all drop out of the bottom of that. So, your company strapline will come out of your culture, because your culture is what is going to differentiate you from everybody else. If you go deep enough and you nail down the true core values, that is what's going to differentiate you from everybody else. There's very little stuff that people are building new now, and providing you products. And when they do, within several weeks, there's 3 or 4 copycats delivering the same thing. It's very difficult to stay in a market of one. So if you're never in a market of one, the only thing that's going to differentiate you is your culture, the culture you build and your value base. So that's what you've got to put into your marketing, because that's what says, come and work with us and not them, every time. So actually, they grow from the same stem. Your culture and the behaviors you're defining come from that value base, and your marketing messaging should reflect that value base, because that's what is going to attract your ideal client. That is what is going to differentiate you from anybody else in the marketplace, and people are going to want to work with you over and above anybody else.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. So interesting. So earlier on, I mentioned that you are also an author, and you did publish a book called Culture. So, congratulations on all the books that you've published. But can you tell us a little bit more about this book, what it's all about, and who is it for?
Originally, it was for me. I have to write. I'm a very simple kind of guy, so I have to write stuff to get it into order. I have to put it in some structure to kind of get my thoughts organized. Otherwise, I just drift and fail to understand stuff. And so everything in the book was about me getting my thoughts in order and getting a structure on what I wanted to deliver for clients. Having done that, I realized it was actually really useful material, and it was really helpful for other people. And so I showed it to some other people that were in a similar situation, and they thought it was fantastic. So at that point, I'm like, well, can we package this up in a way that makes it accessible? Yeah. So the book originally was for me to get my ideas in order, but then it just turned out that it was useful to other people. So we published it, and yeah, people seem to enjoy it, so it's good.
Okay. And you also, I think, published another one on fear. Is that correct?
Yes, more recently we just published a book called No More Fear. That's more about the individual and understanding your individual journey and where you want to go, and some of the tools and processes I use to focus my attention. Often there's a reasonably well-known law called the 80-20 principle, or the Pareto principle, that says 80% of your results come from 20% of the work.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've worked really hard over the last 4 or 5 years to focus on that 20% and help me figure out what is that 20% and put my energies into that 20% rather than be distracted by the 80%. So the process of me doing that and some of the tools I've used are in that book, and it helps people kind of understand what they're trying to achieve, and then gives them some of the tools that I've used to help them be focused and become massively productive in that space.
Yeah, fantastic. So what's next for the Culture Guy? Any projects coming up? We've
just launched the Culture Accelerator, which is a short program that people can sign up to take them through this journey of understanding their culture, defining it well, and start to put in place the implementation. So we've launched that. The first cohort will be, I think it's mid-July. The first cohort will be coming through, but it's a really small group. So we're doing it in cohorts of kind of 7 or 8 people. Okay. So it's a really close-knit cohort, and we'll take them through the process, and there'll be some one-to-one conversations with me to help them land some of that stuff, and one-to-one consultancy that I can help on their business. But that's launching with the first cohort going live in July.
Excellent. So obviously people can find out about that on your website and on your social media.
Absolutely. If you get onto Google and search for the Culture Guy, I will be there, number 1.
No, that sounds great. So thanks, Ben. That was a really interesting talk. I mean, obviously we understand now that how culture can be vital for your own business and your own structure, and also for yourself, because it kind of helps to pave the way to success and to create your own legacy. Thank you, Ben. I really enjoyed this talk. I've learned loads, and wishing you all the best for this new project that you've got launching, and for maybe any future book that you want to publish.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure.
Yes, thank you. So yeah, hi guys, make sure you join me next Monday as I welcome my next guest, Laura Payne-Stanley from Elevate Labs. And we're going to be talking all about membership site and how it can be another source of revenue for your business. And I'm very much looking forward to it. So make sure you join us next Monday at 4 p.m.
Laura is fantastic, Olivia. That's such a good guest. I love Laura. She's brilliant. So for your guests, they shouldn't miss that one. It's going to be fantastic.
No, I look forward to it. But to be honest, my whole June lineup is pretty cool, and I'm looking forward to all the guests. But yeah, thanks a lot, Ben. It was a pleasure to have you on the show. And for everybody watching, make sure that you keep subscribing to our YouTube channel. Come and join us on the Facebook group. You would have seen now that we launched the Creative Hub. So come and network with us. Come and learn. Tam is there, and she's going to be your lovely host. So make sure you join us on the Facebook group. And of course, for now, be visible, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.